All right, hello everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Star Wars Mark of Balance. My name is Mark, and I'm going to be talking about the High Republic today, and I'm very excited to talk about the High Republic because I've really only highlighted it on my Instagram through my book reviews of all the mainline novels that have come out during this time period, and I've only mentioned it a couple times in past episodes, but this episode is going to be solely dedicated to this time period of Star Wars that I absolutely fell in love with since the start. And I'm always advocating for people to check out this rich piece of Star Wars media that I think gets overlooked by the general public just because of the medium it's in, which is books, comics, and graphic novels. And this idea of the general public not being exposed to this story in this time period in Star Wars is really the genesis for this episode. Today, I want to talk about why a High Republic animated TV show is the best way to get this story across to a broader audience, and I think it's the only medium that could make this story work. And there's a bunch of reasons I'm going to get into across this episode, mainly focusing on being able to fully realize some of these high concepts that are brought up in the High Republic that I think would be difficult to bring to life in live action, at least on the budget of a TV show. I think animation gives a lot more freedom for some of the different species that show up in the books and comic books. I also think the length of time that you need to tell this story, I think, is a bit too ambitious for a movie or a movie trilogy. I really think you would need a 12 to 16 episode season to really flesh out a lot of the events and characters that are introduced in these novels that I just don't think a movie runtime could do. And I think animation would allow for those longer seasons because it is cheaper than these live action shows that we've seen have kind of been capped at around 8 to 12 episodes, Andor being the exception, but I don't know if we'll ever get the funding that Andor got again for a TV show. So I do want to see this in a longer form medium. And finally, I think it'll just be a nice evolution for Star Wars animation because, of course, we have Bad Batch ending next year. And I think we're looking for another Star Wars animated TV show. And I think we want to continue to push the envelope on what animation can be, from Clone Wars to Rebels to Bad Batch. So with all that being said, before I jump in, I do want to give some background into the High Republic for anyone that's not familiar with it, or if they've only heard about it by title but really don't know what the story and the time period is like. So I'm just going to give a broad overview. I'm not going to get into spoilers, just want to paint the picture for you guys before I get into all these details. So the High Republic is a Lucasfilm publishing initiative that started a couple years back that wanted to tell a brand new, fresh story in the Star Wars galaxy in a time period we had never explored before. And this story would be told exclusively across books, spin-off books, comic books, even manga are coming out around the High Republic. And I respect Disney a lot for this because, of course, as someone who's advocated for Star Wars moving beyond the Skywalker timeline, this was really exciting to see unique and fresh ideas in the Star Wars galaxy, but still being baked into the lore and the world that George Lucas created. Of course, books and comic books are a pretty low monetary risk for Disney to take, and if this story didn't work, then they would just cut it off and it would be not that big of a loss, because I don't know how big of a generator of revenue this is for Disney. It might be a lot, it might be a little, I'm not too sure, but this was a low risk for Disney. I'll say that before I give them too much props. But again, it's a new story, it's fresh, and I really love what they've done. And the most important part is Disney let them plan it. They planned out all the different phases before they even started, and they had a group of writers, the luminous writers and authors, and everything's been planned out so far. So that gives it that cohesive tissue that some of the movies and TV shows haven't really done while under Disney. So now to get into the story of the High Republic. As I mentioned, there are multiple phases in the High Republic, 3 in total. The third one is just kicking off now, and it will be the final phase of this initiative. The first phase takes place about 150 years before the events that happen in The Phantom Menace. The Republic is at the height of its power. It's a relatively peaceful time period across the galaxy. The Jedi are also at the height of their power. They're seen as these elegant, regal figures to the galaxy as a whole. They adorn these white robes and they have gold accents across their lightsabers and across the robes. So they have this very regal appearance to them that is kind of different than what we see in the Clone Wars and prequel era Jedi that we see in the movies and in Clone Wars. So there's a huge respect for Jedi during this time period that I think changed because of the Clone Wars, but right now they are still seen as those symbols of light and life and hope to the Republic and to the galaxy as a whole. And so what kicks off this entire storyline is the introduction of the Nihil, or the Nihil, as I call them, even though I think it's the Nihil. These are a band of marauders and space pirates. Essentially think like Mad Max Fury Road, that death metal type group that drives the cars. Just put those in space and make them pirates. And that's essentially what the Nihil are. They're brutal, ruthless, they take over, they destroy, they pillage, all that terrible stuff. And they're the main antagonists, and they're led by this leader named Markin Rowe. Again, I read these and I have my own names and I call him Martian Rowe. But he's a enigmatic figure that is on a search for power, of course, as all great antagonists are. But with the Nihil, it's really moving towards a state of anarchy in the galaxy, and it directly goes against the Republic and what the Republic stands for in uniting everything, while Martian Rowe essentially wants the galaxy to be anarchy. And he does this by naming his Nihil and all their ships, the Storm. He has his leaders, they're called the Tempest Runners. So there's this iconography around the Nihil that is based in storms, weather, tempest, hurricanes, stuff like that. So I think that's really cool that they gave that piece of lore to the Nihil. And the thing that sets the Nihil out from other marauders is that they have this special power that their ships are able to cross hyperspace much differently and much more efficiently than what we've seen in Star Wars media before. It's called the paths. And then they also have these creatures that feed on Force users. They're called the Nameless. They're these very Cthulhu-esque, mysterious creatures that essentially threaten the very essence of the Star Wars galaxy. They have the ability to literally wipe out all Force users. So they're this new threat to the galaxy that we've never seen before in Star Wars canon, and they are truly horrific. I love how the authors have not given them a definitive shape and form so that they can remain this cosmic horror image in our head. And again, the way that they kill and destroy people in these stories is some of the most horrific stuff we've seen in Star Wars. As you can see, there's a lot going for the Nihil, and while they don't fulfill the typical Sith or dark side role in the High Republic era that we typically see in Star Wars, the Nihil do offer that perfect foil to the Jedi. Where the Jedi seek peace, the Nihil seek chaos. Where the Jedi act in selflessness, the Nihil are driven by selfishness. And with the stage set like this, you can see that it's very galaxy spanning. There are a lot of large-scale conflicts that occur in these novels. And there's a lot of characters on both sides, the good, the bad, and even the gray and the middle characters to be explored in this time period. So with all this background out of the way, I do want to jump into some of the reasons why I think animation and a TV show format would work best for this story. First thing is, of course, it being more available and more digestible to a broader audience. At this point, 3 phases into the High Republic, there are dozens of books and comics to keep up with. Of course, there are some mainline books, and I think in total, the mainline books bring it down to about 10 to 12. So you can get the full story without reading all the spin-off novels and stuff. But still, telling someone that they need to read 12 novels and them not being that big of a bookworm might deter them from ever experiencing this story, maybe outside watching like a YouTube lore video, which is cool as well. But I really think this story should be experienced like it is in the novels. And I know a lot of you will say, oh, Mark, you're usually a big proponent for respecting the original medium that a story is told in. And I definitely agree. I have said that. I definitely stand on that when it comes to converting things from animation to live action. But I think when it comes to books, you are converting it to a visual medium. So there is value in that, in seeing these things come to life. And then, of course, you have the art direction, you have the music, and you have the character performances that you just can't have in your head, at least for most people. And I think that immediately already elevates the material if done correctly and with respect to the story that was told. So in this case, I think the medium change here is very much warranted and is something I would love to see, especially these huge, large scale battles with so much sacrifice, loss, and emotion that I felt just reading it. I can't imagine if that was put on screen with Star Wars music. Oh, and the animation from Clone Wars. It just all sounds like such a great package for people to take in. And I think just by you hearing me talk about the backstory of the High Republic, I think you guys could all tell that this would be a very expensive and ambitious story to tell. And I think live action wouldn't be able to do it, at least on a TV show budget, because I think you have to remember that Star Wars movies are about 2.5 hours. And they get about the same budget as these Disney Plus TV shows. And these Disney Plus TV shows go about 8 to 12 episodes. So you have about roughly 6 to 7 hours of TV content to the 2 to 2.5 hour movie content. And they're both made within the same 2 to 3 year cycle. So you know that the quality that you see in movies isn't able to be replicated on a TV show, at least for the most part, in the live action medium. And I think that's why if you use a animated TV show to tell this story, you're going to be saving a lot of money, and the money that you're putting in, you're going to get a product like Clone Wars Season 7 or Bad Batch Season 2, which I'm not saying Bad Batch is the best show that Star Wars has ever done, but the animation quality is undeniable. And I think would fit perfectly to the grittiness that this era of Star Wars has in the High Republic. And as I mentioned, this is a very large galaxy spanning conflict with so many characters that you have to explore, not just in the Jedi, but there's also civilian politician type characters. Then there is, of course, the bad guy characters in the Nihil, which I really like about these novels because they do go inside the heads of the bad guys. They don't just have them as these distant threats that you only see in battle. You do have intimate moments with the Nihil and their people. And then, of course, there's people in the middle, the gray characters that aren't good, aren't bad, but they're just getting by in this kind of chaotic time in the galaxy. So I think with such a large ensemble of characters, a movie, again, would be very difficult to really dive into all of these different stories and really give them the time they deserve. And then again, in live action, I think you could have these large ensembles like we have in Andor. But again, I think the scope of Andor is a bit smaller than what I'm talking about here in the High Republic. Because Andor, there are large-scale battles, but I think in the broader scheme of Star Wars, when you think about it, those are pretty intimate battles, like the battle on Ferrix, the Eye. While they are visually dazzling and they look and feel big because it's great production, when you think about movies like the Battle of Hoth, Geonosis, all of those things are large scale. And that's what we're kind of talking about when we're talking about the High Republic. So it's either you have to do a movie or you have a lower budget TV show for these type of battles. And I think animation like Clone Wars with the Geonosis arc in Clone Wars or the Siege of Mandalore, these huge battles can be fully realized. Umbara, of course, these huge battles can be realized and you have the time to do them justice. You know, you have those 3-4 part arcs within Clone Wars that really encompass everything you need from the battle and the story. Outside of huge battle sequences with animation and how that gives you a lot of freedom to work with those fights and the choreography and the large scale explosions and damage, you also have to consider all the different and diverse characters that are introduced in the High Republic. You aren't just dealing with human characters that play large roles. You also have a lot of alien characters and a lot of these Nihil who are dressed up in all this crazy metal cyberpunk-esque gear. Again, I think it's difficult to realize in a live action setting that I think in animation would be a lot easier to get across to the audience and just make, again, the budget for the show be used more efficiently. Because I think hair and makeup alone, just for a lot of these characters and the prosthetics that you need, would be very difficult. I know we all love Rosario Dawson as Ahsoka and the way she looks, but we have to consider that the Ahsoka we see in The Mandalorian Season 2, her montrails are about as short as Ahsoka in Season 1 and 2 of Clone Wars. And we just kind of had to accept that because, of course, there were limitations to prosthetics and her fight choreography because of the montrails. So they had to shorten them. And even now, in the Ahsoka TV show, her montrails are so much shorter than what they were in Rebels, and Rebels happens 20 years prior, unless, there's this lore that, the montrails of Torgruda actually become shorter as they get older. But we all know that's not true. It's just a limitation of prosthetics and makeup in the live action medium, which in animation just simply isn't. It's not a restriction. And even the creatures that we see, of course, as I mentioned, the nameless, I think in live action that would be difficult to realize, but I think in animation you can get so creative in how to show how they affect Force users from their point of view and fully realize how horrific they are when they are killing or destroying Force users. I just think, again, in live action, that might come off a little too CGI and janky for a TV show. And then you have some companion characters, like one of the main Jedi Padawans that turns into a Jedi Knight. He finds this Charhound, which is essentially this dog that breathes fire and looks kind of like a dragon. Again, this might be difficult to realize in live action. At least they won't be able to be in as many scenes as they probably are in the books because of those live action limitations. But in animation, we can totally get Ember all over the screen and it would be fantastic. And I do want to get back to the battles and the violence of this era because I think something the books are always given a bit more freedom to do. And I don't know if this will fully translate because of Disney, but the books, even outside the High Republic for Star Wars, are always able to get away with a bit more violence and a bit more romantic storylines that I think we only really saw in like Andor, like an implied sex scene a couple times. But I think this darker aspect of the books brings a lot more groundedness to Star Wars, something like I said that Andor has because they are in it. And I think it makes a lot of the Jedi characters feel a little bit more relatable compared to the monks that we see in the Clone Wars. And I think the violence really heightens the emotional weight of a lot of the stuff that we see happen in the novels that I think without it, or if it was toned down, it just wouldn't hit as hard. Of course, there's a lot of sacrifice. There's a lot of death in the High Republic, which again, I think is a great piece of it. There's always stakes. No character is safe. And I feel like we know as fans of live action Star Wars that characters are safe a lot of the time. You can get stabbed in the stomach and you're fine. You can get shot in your Beskar armor and it never affects you. You're totally good. So I think Star Wars needs to bring back that sense of danger that these books have. And while Clone Wars, Bad Batch, and even Rebels in some moments do have very dark moments, definitely Clone Wars most of all, I do think this would be a great opportunity for an evolution in Star Wars animation. I think Bad Batch is this great example of the animation has advanced, but some of the storytelling is still stuck in that phase where it's like, we kind of want to be a kid show, but also we want to appeal to those older Clone Wars fans that are now, in their 20s and still watching Clone Wars and Star Wars animation. I think the High Republic is very mature in its storytelling and not overly, not like R-rated, not like TVMA, but I do think that there is an opportunity for Star Wars animation to take that next step and fully embrace, those darker arcs of the Clone Wars and make that a show. I'm not saying there isn't any lightheartedness in the High Republic, but it's definitely more grounded. It's more realistic lightheartedness. And, there isn't episodes like in season 2 of Bad Batch when there's just like this random race on a world and Tech gets to win and we're like, go Tech. Like, we don't need that anymore. Like, I want to see Star Wars animation be something new and fully evolve. And I just think the High Republic storyline that is presented is that golden opportunity, not to reference the golden accents and all of the Jedi in the High Republic. And as I wrap this up, I just want to gush about the High Republic some more. I mean, these Jedi characters that we see in the High Republic are so much more relatable because they're much less dogmatic than the ones that we see in the prequel era. That hypocrisy, at least in the large majority of the Jedi we see in the High Republic, isn't as prevalent as it is in the prequels and the Clone Wars. These Jedi are much closer to normal people just trying to do good and accept that they have flaws, and those flaws are acknowledged, and people are there to help them work through those flaws instead of scolding them or even, ostracizing them, as we kind of see in the prequel era. It's a much more tolerant Jedi Order. I think the breadth of characters that we see in the Jedi Order across the High Republic books are much more diverse than what we see in the prequels. So I just can't stop gushing about how great some of the Jedi characters are here. And I think just seeing them fully realized, I think they would easily become some fan favorites for Star Wars fans that just don't know they exist because they don't read the books. I can think right off the top of my head, like Padawan Maddie from Phase 2. She's this really quirky, curious, and sarcastic Jedi that I want to see come to life in animation. We have characters like Elzar Mann, who is a very deeply conflicted Jedi that is extremely relatable across his storyline. I think even his lightsaber is now available at Disney parks, which is really cool to see. And I think the lore that they introduce here really expands what's possible in the Star Wars galaxy. Like I mentioned, the Nameless, the Nihil with their paths drives to jump through hyperspace in new and different ways. Seeing a Marauder group be the bad guys instead of maybe the Empire or like a Sith Lord. It's just a different take on Star Wars, which I want more people to experience. It is encouraging that we have seen the High Republic lore and story leak into mainstream Star Wars. We saw it in Star Wars Jedi Survivor. The Marauders that came to Tanalorr in the flashbacks, that was the Nihil. So that was really amazing to see for me. We have The Acolyte coming out, which is a live action show, but that takes place at the end of the High Republic. So I don't really think it's going to connect to what we saw in the High Republic book series. It's really going to be more closely tied to what leads to what happens in the prequels, which I am very excited. I'm so looking forward to that show. It's my most anticipated Star Wars show, but I'm hoping that opens the door for more mainstream High Republic content like this animated TV show that maybe the Acolyte does really well, and they say, okay, let's go back and look at the High Republic and the story that was told across the books in animated form, because people seem to like what we did here. We got the validation. Let's do it in animation. So before I wrap up, again, I do not want to discourage anyone from reading the High Republic novels. I always advocate for them in my book reviews. I always try and be open and honest about whether the stories are worth it. I always try to make sure that people understand the order of how to read the books. Each first sentence of my review tells you exactly what book, in what phase, and where we are in the High Republic, so that people read that and say, oh, okay, if I just follow his book reviews, I know exactly how to read these novels in order to get the story. So I hope that those book reviews have inspired you to read the novels and maybe make it a little less daunting. I've been following along for a while, so it's easy for me to keep up, but I understand you see a stack of 12 books, all 400 pages, and you're like, wow, that's a lot of reading to do. But it is definitely worth it. I cannot suggest it enough. But for the people that just aren't into reading, which is totally fair, and will likely never get to these novels in that big of a capacity, maybe outside just understanding what happens in them, I want them to experience this story. I think Disney needs to move on from the Skywalker saga. We see that they're going to be pushing the Daisy Ridley movie that's after Episode 9. We have the Dave Filoni movie that's going to fill in between 6 and 7. But, after that, what is going to happen? Are we going to keep going with Daisy Ridley's story? Or do we take a step back and say, oh, High Republic, we have a lot of lore. We have a lot of things to pull from. We can pull a Marvel and just be like, hey, we have a storage of stories that are proven. People love them. Let's take them and bring them to life, because a lot of Star Wars, and maybe some of the issues with some of the Star Wars, is that there is no established canon, so people are kind of throwing stuff at the wall sometimes. But the High Republic is there. It's thought out. It's all phased out for you. Just take it. Just take the easy win, Disney. I know it would be a hit, and you would have some of the best characters in Star Wars reach a broader audience. So that's the end of this episode. I had so much fun fully dedicating an episode to this piece of Star Wars that I love so much and I want more people to love. I hope you guys could feel that passion. I hope you guys could see where I'm coming from here. You know, I'm always advocating not only for the High Republic, but for more animated Star Wars TV. And I think this is the golden ticket moving forward. So if anyone at Disney somehow stumbles along this, or Dave Filoni, if you're doing your Sunday podcast run and you come along with this, please bring this to the Disney execs. If the Disney execs are already thinking about this and Lucasfilm is already producing this and is waiting to announce it, more power to you. Love you for that. But yeah, High Republic to the moon, as always, for light and life. If you guys enjoyed this content, please follow me on Instagram at @star_wars_mark of balance. All of my High Republic book reviews are on there, and any upcoming book reviews will also be on there. So keep a lookout for those if you are thinking about getting into this piece of Star Wars, and get updates on all my other Star Wars content and podcast episodes. Please share this episode or this podcast with anyone that you know that enjoys Star Wars, friends, family. Best way to market is word of mouth, so would really appreciate that. Give me a review on whatever platform you're listening to. And as always, stay safe, stay healthy, and may the Force be with you for light and life. Peace.